All right. Are you ready?
I am.
Perfect. Let me make sure the cat's not about to do anything majorly dickish. He's just staring at the dog, which is, concerning to me. What are you gonna do, and why do I feel like it's mean? Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Same Page. If you don't already know me, I'm your host, Jenna Clausen, lover of books, sympathizer of book-to-movie adaptations, and owner of an embarrassingly long TBR list. Each month, I'll be bringing on a bookish friend or two to discuss some of our current and favorite books, as well as a few recent binge watches, and to share in a buddy read. Grab a drink, join the discussion, and let's find out if we're on the same page. Trigger warnings for the book that we'll be discussing in today's episode, as well as our discussion itself, include alcoholism and other drug addiction, underage drinking, drug dealing, infidelity, detailed descriptions of drug usage and injections, overdoses and withdrawals, and discussion of rape, as well as potentially more that I've missed. Please be safe and smart if these topics may be triggering for you, and please take care of yourself and practice self-care in order to intake this media in a healthy way. And if you or anyone you know is struggling with addiction, please take a look at the resources down in the show notes. My guest today is my friend Addie, also known on Bookstagram as Book Crazy Blogger. She's been running her blog for the last 2 years, where she reviews all sorts of genres, including mysteries, thrillers, contemporary fiction, and young adult. She also has 2 adorable dogs who feature heavily in her photos and reviews, after they've been bribed with treats. You can find all of her social media information, as well as where to follow her, down in the show notes. And with that, let's jump on into the episode. Welcome back to the podcast. My phone is falling off of my lap. I am excited to have you back. Before we get too far into talking about the book, and I'll kind of go over the publication info again really quickly like I did last week. Do you want to start us off with what you're drinking? Do you have more water?
I do, actually. I mean, it's like this much water because I totally forgot to fill up my water. I was like so focused on my bananas that I was like, oh, banana. And then I was like, oh, I don't need to hydrate myself. But I was wrong.
Hydration is so overrated.
It really is. Like, it just honestly, like, human functions in general are, like, overrated. Like, like, honestly, like, I wish I could just plug myself into, like, a battery pack, and then I don't actually have to, like, sleep or anything like that. Like, I can still keep doing stuff. And then, like, I wish I, like, didn't have to eat or anything. And I definitely wish I didn't have to, like, expel waste. Like, that's just, like, how many hours of my life am I wasting by, like, doing basic human functions? Like, come on, evolution, get it together.
I mean, I get it. I have never specifically had that thought before, but now that it's in the world, I'm like, yeah, I'm with that. I went super extra with my drink today, apparently. So I have an empty coffee cup and a small pot of green tea.
Oh my god, that's so adorable.
It is very cute. So a little, like, I should have done this before we started, and I forgot to do that. So a little, like, ASMR moment, maybe? I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh, it's very hot in my hands. Yeah, so I have a tropical green tea.
Fancy.
I know. It's, again, probably later than I should be drinking caffeine, but I'm just so tired, and I still have so much I need to do today. So...
The world never sleeps. What's that Robert Frost poem where it's like, the world never stops or something like that?
Yes. I don't remember it exactly, but, are you looking it up?
I absolutely am.
I saw that look in your eyes. I see it in my husband a lot, and I'm like, oh, yeah, that's the I'm gonna look it up right now face. Yeah. I have a really bad memory for poetry, which is interesting because I love it so much. And Robert Frost specifically, my parents there was this one shelf in their bookshelves when I was a kid that I just loved so much. It was all of these like old like hardcover copies of books, and one of them was a collection of Robert Frost, and I used to just carry it around and read it all the time. And so you would think I would remember this poem that you're talking about.
But I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. God, same.
Yeah. Another
and
issue.
I'm not a fan of poetry at all, but like this, like Robert Frost is like the only poet that I'm like, oh yeah, I can get behind you.
Just so
But it's only like it's really only the 2 poems, which is Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening and The Road Not Taken.
The classic one. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Ah.
Oh no.
Sorry.
You ran away for a second. So really quickly, we are doing our book discussion this week. So we said it in the last episode, but for anyone watching, this is the cover. If you want to hold it up, we can do a cute little like thumbnail moment. Like, oh my gosh, we're so cute. I told my husband, I was like, I need you to teach me. Again, I'm so bad with technology. We were just talking about this before we started. But I was like, yes, hello, husband. I am a grown adult, and I need you to teach me how to pick what I want the thumbnail to look like.
I have no idea how to do that.
So far, it's just been YouTube being like, hey, here's your 3 options that we found in your video. And me being like, great.
I'll use this.
Right. And sometimes I'll complain that they don't have any good options. And Nick's like, God bless America. Just figure out how to do normal technology things.
It's like, I can't figure it out.
Yeah,
don't judge me.
Please help.
Don't judge me.
But anyway, this again is the cover. Super intense with a glare, red and black face. The book is Tweak, Growing Up on Methamphetamines by Nic Sheff. Publisher is Atheneum Books. Copyright year 2008. And then at least this paperback version that I have is 322 pages. And I did realize last week I didn't read the inside cover, like the description. And I usually do, so that was weird. I think my brain just skipped right past it last week. So I'm going to do that really quickly. So it says, Nic Sheff was drunk for the first time at age 11. In the years that followed, he would smoke pot regularly, do cocaine and ecstasy, and develop addictions to crystal meth and heroin. Even so, he had always felt like he could quit and put his life together whenever he needed to. It took a violent relapse one summer to convince him otherwise. In a voice that is raw and honest, Nic spares no detail in telling the compelling, heartbreaking, and true story of his relapse and his journey toward recovery. Yeah, so definitely heartbreaking, definitely spares no detail. I do feel like I need to say, just like right off the bat, I was not able to finish this book. And I know, I feel so guilty. But here is kind of the reasoning that I'm giving myself. So I don't, on Instagram it's DNF, didn't finish, and I don't DNF books ever. Like basically ever. There's a book that I picked up last November, like not 2020 November, like 2019 November, and wasn't enjoying and put down, but I still have it marked as reading to remind myself that I need to go back to it. Like I feel very guilty, and I think that might just be a part of my anxiety or something when I pick up a book and I don't finish it. But I was working my way through this book, and I always talk about in trigger warnings and, whatever, if something is not necessarily doing well for your health, you need to put it down. And it was basically, I was not following my own advice, and then my husband took the book and hid it for a bit and was like, this is not doing good things for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really intense book.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be honest.
So I did have to put this one down. But I watched the movie this afternoon so that I would at least like kind of have a better scope of the full story. And yeah, I don't know. I'm not positive like what part of me was having so much of an issue with this book. We were talking beforehand and I was saying that my mental health over the past like year and a half, maybe 2 years, has just kind of been on a steady decline. Like it's just through no fault of my own or anyone else's, like no specific situation. It's just I'm not mentally and emotionally in a great place right now. And so I think it might be a mix of that and a mix of I have trouble controlling my empathy sometimes. And so I think the fact that I was reading it and it's not situations that I can relate to, I was more going into the empathy of it. So I'm going to keep the book and potentially revisit it when I'm in kind of a better place myself.
Yeah.
But I did have an easier time with the movie. You had mentioned last week, I don't remember if it made it into the episode or not, but that the movie is more based off of David's book and David's perspective, so the dad, rather than Nic's. And I think that might be part of why I had a bit of an easier time with that one.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I think that, for me personally, I think that the reason I relate to this book so much is because it is filtered through the lens of an addict. And that's just what I relate to. Whereas when I was reading David's book, one, it's very much nonfiction. It's a nonfiction / memoir. So there's a lot of information about like the physiology of the brain and like how the brain reacts to crystal meth and everything like that.
Interesting.
And it's very like science based. And I'm not a huge fan of nonfiction. I'm not a huge fan of like sciencey books.
Sure.
So
at
like
a certain
I
point,
relate.
it kind of feels like a textbook.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So like I related a lot more to his struggle coming at it as like a father. Well, not necessarily coming at it as a father, but coming at it and from the perspective of a loved one trying to help another loved one through their addiction. Mm-hmm. It's kind of tricky for me because, not only am I an addict myself, but I've also been in a place where I've been on the other side too, where I've tried to get a loved one to rehab. I've tried to get a loved one to get clean and everything like that. And it's very, very difficult, especially when that other person does not want to get clean. You're basically shit out of luck.
Right. Yeah, I can only imagine how difficult that would be. I mean, from both sides, obviously. It's a very different struggle for two people in the same, like, situation together.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like I said, I felt guilty because I know how much this book means to you and how excited you were. And so I felt like I needed to get that just right off the bat.
Honestly, I don't blame you for not being able to finish it because it's intense. Like, it's really, really intense. And it's definitely, like, something that I needed as a kid, really. Like, so I first read this book when I was 13, maybe 12 or 13. So I was right at that age where no one in my life had started using drugs or drinking yet, but 2 years later we were in high school, so I was about 15, and that's when all of my friends started using. And it really was like, this book helped me to be like, okay, I'm not going to continue drinking in high school. I'm not going to be smoking weed all the time in high school. I'm not going to be eating mushrooms in high school. I'm not going to be experimenting with ecstasy or hallucinogens or anything like that. Like, to this day, I haven't ever done any hallucinogens. I haven't done crack. I haven't done coke. I haven't done heroin. That being said, I also, part of the reason for me getting clean is because I know it's a short jump from a very powerful synthetic marijuana option to painkillers to heroin. And that's why I got clean, because I don't want to make that jump between painkillers to heroin.
Yeah, absolutely. And that just, I think, more than anything, like I said, I think it might have been the fact that I couldn't necessarily turn off the part of my brain and the part of my heart that was feeling all of the empathy towards Nic as in this moment a character in a book. Where those inner monologues of his and the struggles and seeing him making that shift, it's really difficult. So yeah, like I said, I can tell how powerful this book can be. I think I might try and return to it when I'm in a bit of a better place. But
how far did you get?
I got about a third of the way through.
So
of 322, like probably 108 or 110, something like that.
Okay, got it. Yeah, it does get more intense after that. I will say, like, you know, the latter half of the book, when he has his relationship with Zelda, is, wow, it's very difficult to read.
Yeah. So I did not get quite that far.
Yeah. I don't blame you.
My poor husband was like, we were sitting on the couch and he was watching me read and he was watching me kind of like sink into myself. And he was like, I need you to put this book down for the night. We're gonna read your cute little rom-com that you're reading and we're gonna read that instead. And it's gonna be great.
Yes. It is. I mean, this book is graphic. Like, it does not hold back prisoners. Like, it is physically graphic in his depictions of what his body looks like and what his body was, like, physically going through. It's emotionally graphic in terms of, like, just how emotionally charged all these different situations got. It was, you know, the relationships are, you know, there's a certain point where he is being physically abused by a girlfriend, and he does not hold back in, you know, any of that. You know, there's depictions of him having a psychotic break, and, like, that's scary. Yeah. Too bad I didn't take that part more to heart, but it's fine. Let me just tell you, like, you know, I don't know if you've ever been on TikTok or anything, but, like, I follow there's, like, a really big, like, recovery TikTok community. And so, like, myself and, like, I know a lot of other, like, bigger accounts that have been in it longer than I have, we tend to make light of recovery. We don't tend to make light of recovery. We tend to make light of the situations that we've been through, and we tend to make light of, you know, talking about, like, things like drug psychosis and talking about the shadow people and everything like that. But when you stop to think about it, it's really not that funny. Yeah. It's actually really terrifying. But the only way that I can deal with that trauma is to just kind of, like, joke about it and be like, ha ha ha.
For sure. I mean, it's a person in a horror movie that's cracking jokes the whole time because humor is their defense mechanism. It's the emotional equivalent of... This is going to make it sound so bad, and like I'm saying, it's like a bad thing towards you, and I don't mean that at all, but it's kind of the emotional equivalent of trying to, like, run away from the situation for a bit and maybe come back later. Because it's just like that... There would be some things that would be so hard to deal with. And, you know, people's brains and hearts can only deal with so much stress and trauma at a time. And sometimes you kind of Gotta find a way to work around that until you're ready to dive deeper.
Definitely. I mean, I've been there. Oh boy, have I been there.
So, normally in book discussions, I will ask favorite character, scene, and quote. I don't really want to include character in this because it is a work of nonfiction. These are real people, and I don't necessarily want to be discussing them like they're not, if that makes sense. And because I didn't get very far, I didn't write down a favorite scene or anything necessarily that stuck out to me in that sense. I did write down a couple of quotes from, I want to say they're both really early on, actually, like the first 4 chapters or something that really jumped out at me. Do you have like a favorite scene or something that when you read it speaks to you a lot or anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me see. So, sorry,
No, you're good. Normally, I warn people that I'm going to ask these questions, and I did not warn you ahead of time. So, everyone else forgive the shuffling of pages here.
So, let's see. Okay, so there's a couple of quotes. There were the treatment centers. I've spent the last 3 years in and out of 12-step programs. Throughout all of it, the underlying craving never really left me, and that was accompanied by the illusion that the next time things would be different. I'd be able to handle it better. I didn't want to keep hurting people. I didn't want to keep hurting myself. A girlfriend of mine once said to me, "I don't understand. Why don't you just stop?" This is something that my parents have said to me. This is something that other family members have said to me. And this is something that other friends and significant others have also said to me. I couldn't think of an answer. The fact was, I couldn't just stop. That sounds like a cop-out, but it's the truth. It's like I'm being held captive by some insatiable monster that will not let me go, that will not let me stop. All my values, all my beliefs, everything I care about, they all go away the moment I get high. There is a sort of insanity that takes over. I convince myself and believe very strongly that this time, it will be different. I tell myself that after such a long time clean, I can go back to casual use. Of course, you never can.
Yeah.
Because that's not how life works.
I remember really kind of stopping to think about that quote as well. And again, these are not situations that I myself have found myself in, but I am a very emotional person. I was born that way, and I can't really turn those off. Again, the part of my brain and the part of my heart that feel empathy, I can't turn those off. And every emotion that I feel much stronger than I think a normal person would necessarily. And yeah. I remember one of my exes specifically, but a few other friends as well, would always be like, well, you just stop, like, you're taking things too personally. You're too emotional, like, you're overly emotional right now, and I need you to stop. And they would, like, cut contact with me sometimes until I calmed my emotions down. And so I can kind of relate to that small portion of that quote where it's like, no matter what it is, if it's a good thing, if it's a bad thing, like, there are things about a person's personality and their habits that it's just, you can't stop overnight. And it's so damaging for people to just say, well, just stop doing it. And there you go. Problem is solved. Like, that's not,
like, yeah, definitely. I would love to, like, take that magic pill that turns me into not an addict, that turns me into, like, not being mentally ill, but, like, unfortunately it doesn't fucking exist. So you're gonna have to deal with it, or you're gonna have to, like, cut contact with me until, you can handle yourself. Because granted, like, something I've learned about in recovery is that, like, one, that I need to be honest about my recovery, and, like, you know, to the point of maybe being overly honest about it.
Sure.
I mean, it's not something that I, like, go around, like, in my personal life, I haven't, like, on my personal Facebook, on my personal, like, Instagram or anything like that, I haven't, like, outright said, like, I'm an addict and I'm in recovery or anything like that. It's not a conversation.
You don't show up with the "Hello, my name is Addie," and like sticker.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's not something that I've had a conversation with like the majority of my family members or anything like that. Like, obviously my parents know, but I haven't had that conversation with, like, my extended family.
Sure.
But that being said, like, if someone were to ask me, like, hey, do you want to get a drink or do you want to do that? Like, I'm not going to say, like, oh, I don't drink, or, oh, I'm not going to use an excuse or anything like that. I'm going to flat out say, like, I'm in recovery. I don't drink, because if I drink, I turn into a monster and you don't want to be by me.
Sure.
Because like, I've had people who are like super uncomfortable with it, and, like, they don't know how to talk to me about it, and they don't know how to, like, react to it. I've had other people who've had, like, really negative experiences with people who are addicts in their own life, and they're kind of like, look at me with suspicion almost, and they're like, okay, well, I'm just gonna wait for you to relapse and stuff like that. And, you know, those people have a right to feel that way. I'm not going to take that away from them, but at the same time, like,
you also don't need those kind of reactions in your life.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't know how to control your own reactions towards my being in recovery, like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, sorry.
And sometimes it can be hard as far as if someone says something to you, maybe not knowing how to respond. Like, if you're talking to someone and they just lost a family member or something, sometimes you don't in that moment know how to respond. But I feel like it's all intentions, and it's all, like, doing what you can to make someone feel heard.
Yeah. Another quote that I really like, which I said last week, but I don't know if it made it in because...
Yeah, I don't remember. I remember I cut one of the quotes because of some tech issues.
Yeah, that's okay. I got thrown into my first treatment center when I was 18. I'd only been doing meth for about 6 months, but already my life had begun falling apart. My dad helped me get into rehab 5 days later. Dad, please, I begged him. I'll stop, I promise. Please, I don't need to do this. You can't come home, Nick. But Dad, I don't belong here. I was wrong. I knew it the first group I went to. One of the residents, Johnny, talked about his descent into crack cocaine addiction. What struck me wasn't so much the specifics of his story, but rather the feelings he described. He talked about how until he started using, he always felt like some alien, different from everybody. I think what he said was, I felt like everyone else had gotten this instruction manual that explained life to them, but somehow I just missed it. They all seemed to know exactly what they were doing, while I didn't have a clue. That is until I found drugs and alcohol. Then it was like my world went from black and white to technicolor. Of course, that had been my experience too, but it didn't mean I was willing to change my behavior. I loved drugs. I loved what they did for me. They relieved me of that terrible sense of isolation I'd always felt. They gave me the manual to life that Johnny had described. I could not give that up. I still had this feeling that it was never going to happen to me. I had a 4.0 in high school. I was a published writer. I came from a good family. Besides, I was too young to really be an addict. I was just experimenting, right?
Yeah. And so the two quotes that I wrote down, part of the reason I wrote them down was I felt like they obviously related to this experience that he was going through, but I felt like could be related to other types of unhealthy experiences as well, so like these two meant more to me personally because I could relate to them to other things as well. And this first one, I think might be right around the same time as the one you just read. And it says, it was like being in a car with the gas pedal slammed down to the floor and nothing to do but hold on and pretend to have some semblance of control. But control was something I'd lost a long time ago. And I really liked that because I have had experiences with not physically, but fairly emotionally abusive relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And this was one that stuck out to me relating to that specifically, where it's like you kind of end up, everything's so great when it starts, you know? And I feel like based off of his story, that was his experience with these addictions as well, is everything's so good and it feels so right. And then just suddenly you don't know how to get out of this situation that you're in.
Yep.
And slowly you kind of start realizing how bad it is and that it's not good and it doesn't feel as good as it used to, but you kind of don't have control over the ride anymore.
Mm-mm.
And so that was one that I really liked.
Yeah. I mean, I will say, with regards to my last relapse, because up until this last relapse, so April 2020, I thought that I could control it. And I thought that it didn't matter, that I could still control it. And, like, there was always this thought in the back of my mind that I could always go back to it. Like, it didn't, like, I didn't believe that I was an addict. I didn't believe that I was an alcoholic. Like, you know, for me, like, I wasn't ever physically addicted to alcohol. I was physically addicted to painkillers and I was physically addicted to other drugs. But I was never physically addicted to alcohol. And also for me personally is I've never gone to detox and I've never gone to rehab. I kicked everything on my own cold turkey, which
Wow.
I do not recommend. But I would, there were multiple times where I would get home and I would, like, be in a corner by myself, like ripping, like trying to, like, rip out my skin or like ripping out my hair, and just like trying not to, and like trying to like claw at my ears because I would hear music that wasn't playing and I would hear voices that weren't actually like people I know. And like I knew it was all in my, like I knew it was like something wasn't right, but like I don't know, like I would hear screaming, women screaming, and it was just, it's not a good time. And I have like major health concerns from it because I was smoking for so long. I had for like a solid 6 or 7 months, maybe even 8 or 9. I was having stroke like symptoms. So like my left arm was going numb. My like left hand gross motor functions were really bad. Um, I had really bad gross motor functions. I was always stumbling. I was always bruising myself. Um, when I'm trying to, obviously, the mental health concerns of psychosis and everything like that. I actually have drug induced hypothyroidism, a very bad case of drug induced irritable bowel syndrome. Um, I'm still working on regaining the muscles in my left side. I'm still working on regaining muscles in my left hand specifically. So yeah, it's a nasty business. When I was 22, I think I was 22, 23, I met a guy and we became very close very quickly. And I guess I would describe him as my own version of Zelda in a way, because like Nick in the book, Nick wants to save Zelda. He wants to save her from her ex-husband, and he wants to save her from her ex-lovers, and he wants to save her from her own demons.
And just really quickly, I think that was part of the conversation that got cut out because the audio was a little fuzzy from last week. So, do you want to just explain Zelda in the book really quickly?
Yeah, so Zelda is Nick's kryptonite, I guess, is how I would describe her.
Yeah.
She is an older woman. Actually, you know what? Pretty sure he can describe it better than I can. Let me find that quote. It's pretty early in the book.
Yeah. I was going to say, I think I know which one you're thinking of, and I got to that one. So check the first third.
Zelda was a woman I thought I was madly in love with. She was 14 years older than I was, and, well, she was also engaged to marry another guy, a wealthy real estate broker named Mike. When I started sleeping with her, I tried to justify it to myself. I figured it was her decision, and I wasn't really doing anything wrong, and it was just for fun. I thought I could get away with it. I thought I could stay detached emotionally. I couldn't. She came to represent for me everything I thought would make my life perfect. After all, she'd been married to this famous actor and was an actress and grew up in Los Angeles. She was raised by her famous uncle, who's also in the movie business. Everyone seems to know her in LA. She's sort of a celebrity. Being with her became my obsession. Ultimately, she wouldn't leave her boyfriend for me and got pregnant with his child. I was crushed. I mean, I just couldn't handle it. So yesterday I relapsed, driving up the 5, drinking from a bottle of Jaeger. And that was kind of the situation I found myself in, where I was at a very low point in my life, and I had lost everyone and everything that I cared about because of my addiction. I'd been kicked out of school. I'd been kicked out of my sorority. All of my friends wanted nothing to do with me. Things at work, I was drinking at work, and justifying it to myself because I said, I just work a retail job. It's not like I'm out saving lives. It's not like I'm doing anything. I mean, granted, you shouldn't be drinking at work anyways. But I met this guy and he became my everything. Like, he was my band-aid in a way.
Sure.
I really cared about him and I really loved him. But at the same time, I really did him wrong because I relied on him to be my emotional security blanket, and I wasn't willing to be honest with him, and I wasn't willing to be honest with myself, and I wasn't working on myself. I wasn't going to therapy or anything like that. I was just constantly focused on him and how I could be better for him. When he ultimately broke up with me, I was crushed. Very similar to Nick, but unfortunately, I had never gotten clean. It just ultimately led me to spiraling even farther, in addition to literally not being able to get out of bed for 2 months.
Switching back to the book here for just a couple minutes, the second and last quote that I wrote down is super short, but he basically just says, again, fix the outsides and maybe my insides won't be such a dark place. And again, with my mental health not being super great the past year or so, and my depression kind of being a little bit worse lately, you always hear people going and like post breakup getting a revenge haircut or like try and look their best so that to feel better, whatever. And that just, I liked that quote, but also I didn't, because I was like, wow, rude. That's my life. Just, it's so much easier to fix the outsides than it is to fix the rest of you. So I know last week you just hit my mic. I'm gonna accidentally throw it across the room. It's because I moved everything. Now I'm in a different place. I'm going to talk with my hands and accidentally throw everything. Last week you had mentioned that this book you try and reread once a year or so. Since your most recent recovery, is there anything new that you get from the book? Is there anything that you see differently when you read the book versus maybe when you read it a few years ago or versus when you were younger?
So I'd say when I first started reading it when I was younger, I really got the impression, don't do coke, don't do heroin, and don't do meth because that shit's going to lend you that stuff's gonna make you end up like how Nick ends up in the book. And there's the first in the book itself, he talks about two different relapses. His first relapse, which I will refer to as the Lauren relapse, is the one that you read about. And like that one gets pretty bad. That one's pretty rough to read about.
Yeah.
But I would say the second relapse is his Zelda relapse, and that one's even worse. That's the one where he tries crack for the first time, and he develops an abscess in his arm that becomes so bad that they have to remove it almost to the bone. And instead of that being enough for him to go to a detox, he just goes to the apartment that he shares with Zelda, and they immediately start shooting up cocaine. There's a scene where he shoots up cocaine crystal meth combination, and I mean, I guess it's like an overdose, but he ends up going into convulsions and like gives himself a concussion, and like Zelda herself is like freaking out, and like then there's another scene, like the scene that finally gets him to get sober is that he has a psychotic break in his mother's garage while he's trying to steal money and a laptop from her. And, he just is in the rafters for hours and like can't get out. So that will, reading all of that at such a young age was enough for me to say no to drugs in high school, and actually be very anti-drug in high school, anti-alcohol. I definitely experimented a little bit in high school, but not nearly to the point where I ended up. So I credit the book for that. Reading it, I think I read it in 2019, so I haven't read it since my 2020 relapse. But reading it since then, and kind of I haven't actually read it. I just kind of like flipped through it a little bit prior to this discussion. I think what really sticks out to me is his relationship with Zelda and how closely it does mirror my relationship with my exes. Sure. In the emotional capacity and in the capacity of adjacent addicts. And I would also say that it just makes me so grateful to be sober. And it just it's a reminder of how bad it can get, and how bad and how quickly it can get, and how quickly it can go. You can go from 0 to 100 real quick. What looks like a single drink of champagne will be me in a trap house doing tricks for drugs. And like, that's, again, it's shameful and it's embarrassing, but like, that's just how far I'll take it. Because I don't, like you said in the beginning, it's like a gas pedal and you don't know how to take your finger off the trigger.
Yeah.
And I will say that he did end up writing a sequel that takes place during his tour. So he does briefly touch on it in the first book, but he goes more in detail about his sex and love addiction in the second book. The fact that he feels like he always needs to have a girlfriend, and he can never be by himself or anything like that. But he ended up relapsing on weed, pills, and alcohol. And I think he gets off the pills relatively quickly, but it's definitely this alcohol and weed addiction that he talks about in the second book. which I relate to a little bit more in the second book because I dealt with the same thing. But eventually he does get clean, completely clean. And he does, he is now sober and completely substance free since like 2011 maybe, or 2012 or something like that, which is just awesome to see, because he's like one of my heroes. As dorky as that sounds, it's just been
dorky.
Really cool. It was really cool to see how this guy went from just being unable to survive and unable to like handle anything, and now if you look at his Instagram, if you look at his Twitter, he's a successful writer for TV, and he's married, and he has 2 dogs, and like he's rebuilt his relationship with his father and with his step family, and it's just really cool to see that, like, we do recover. Like, it's not a death sentence if you don't let it be a death sentence. It's really easy to just give up and give in and say, like, okay, I'm just going to let it take over me, and I'm not going to get clean, and I'm never going to get clean, and I don't want to get clean because there's no life for me besides drugs and alcohol. I don't want to live that life. And like, here I am, I'm 7 months clean, and I have cravings every day. Honestly, I still struggle with cravings a lot, but at the same time, I have my relationship, and I am working on building relationships with other sober women. I've been able to read and almost completely clear my backlist from last year of all the publishers who sent me books during my relapse. I've been almost able to completely clear that out, and having finished all those books, I have my dog actually likes hanging out with me, and my dog actually trusts me again, and my job trusts me again, and I can wake up in the mornings and I'm not foggy and I don't feel sick anymore. Things aren't perfect, and they never will be. But I feel like I can actually focus on building a life with, my soon-to-be fiance. And I can focus on things like getting a house together and having kids together and going back to school. Like, for once, I actually, like, I'm reapplying back to college here in I think like this week, actually, I'm reapplying back to college, and I'm going to work on building my GPA back up again. And, because there is a life out there. And it's hard. It's really hard because you have to fight for it, and you have to wake up every day. And sometimes it's something like you have to wake up every 20 minutes and decide, every 20 minutes I'm not going to take a drink, or every 20 minutes I'm not going to go out and find drugs. For me, like, when I first started getting sober, it really was like every 15 minutes I had to tell myself, nope, I'm not going to use. And now I've made it to like every day. So I'm 7 months on. I've made it to every day I wake up and decide I'm not going to use. Maybe eventually I'll wake up to once a week. Yours helping.
It's a constant battle, but that is, I mean, what a great note to end on. Like, that is so amazing, and congratulations. And that's just, I mean, that is the best thing to take away from this book. Is I looked at his Instagram after I finished watching the movie today, because I was tagging him in the post of the book, and it seems like such a full life that, when you said 2011, 2012, when he got sober, so 2 years before that, he may not have, ever thought he would have. And it's amazing.
And, the thing I want to touch on also that I don't know if it got recorded last year, is that everyone's recovery looks different. So for some people, it's going to 12-step meetings every day. Some people, it's going to Smart Recovery or another form of, whether it's religious or non-religious, another form of a recovery group. For some people, it looks like in order to get off opioids, you do start smoking medical marijuana. For other people, it's being put on Suboxone or methadone or naloxone, which is what I'm on, or any other kind of drug that, will make you sick if you use. And there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with taking subs. There's nothing wrong with taking methadone. As long as you're under a doctor's guidance and as long as you're taking it correctly and as long as you still have that desire to get sober. The desire to get clean comes from you. You have to decide, I want to get clean. You have to decide to fight for it. Nothing anyone else says or does is going to change that. You're the only person who can. But it's worth it.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, do you want to tell people where they can follow you?
Yeah, so you can follow me at Book Crazy Blogger on Instagram and on Facebook. So I talk a lot about my own struggles. I try to relate all the books that I read back to my own life.
And her social media information, as well as all of the resources that I had listed last week, will again be in the show notes. And now that it's completely dark in my house and I look a little bit like a ghost because the only light I still have is my big light. I'm going to just really quickly wrap up the episode itself. So you can email me through the podcast anytime at thesamepagepod@gmail.com. If you have any books you think we should read for the podcast, any questions, collaboration requests, or any talking points if you've already read any of our upcoming books, please send me an email. I'd love for you folks to be a part of those discussions with us. If you want to reach out to me specifically, separate from the podcast, you can find my blog that hosts all of my full reviews, tours, all that jazz at tacklingtbr.home.blog, as well as on Instagram at tackling_TBR. And then for the podcast itself, you can find and connect with us on Instagram at The Same Page Podcast, on Twitter at The Same Page Pod, and you can find us on both Facebook and YouTube just by searching for The Same Page Podcast. And then same thing I always end with, I will say if you are listening to the episodes and like what you hear, thank you. It would mean the world if you decided to go to Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, wherever it is you're listening, and subscribing, leaving a positive rating, and even leaving your thoughts in a review. It takes 2 minutes or less, and it just really helps the show get introduced to more bookish folks. And with that, Addie, thank you so much for coming on and discussing. I know I didn't end up finishing the book, but I think it was a really interesting discussion. And just thank you for sharing your stories with us.
Yeah, thanks for listening and thanks for being so great about it and thanks for not judging me for all the mistakes that I have done.
Oh, girl, we all have things that we regret. And other than that, everyone else, I will be back with a new co-host next week. So we'll see you then.
Bye.
Bye.